Welcome to week 5, day 20 of the fall 2024 Programming Fundamentals with C Sharp. This is Jim Kaufman with Rankin Technical College. First, I want to congratulate everyone. You're already a quarter away through the course. That's an incredible milestone. Time does fly, and please don't let up. Keep pushing forward. Before you know it, we'll be finishing up this course and starting the next one. So please continue working hard. So as far as this week, there will be no written test this week. This will be a big coding week. As far as the hands-on test are concerned, hands-on test, the other ones that we've completed 3 other hands-on tests. Each one of them were worth 100 points each. This hands-on test we'll be doing this week has 2 parts, and so it'll be 200 total points. And as you know, hands-on tests are the grade weighting on the hands-on test are 40% of your grade, so it's very important to complete them and do well on them. So just want to mention that. And then also the list of assignments for this week. Obviously, I just mentioned the hands-on test. So you'll have 3 days to complete that, because it's a little bigger, a little more complex than the other ones. So it'll be due. I'll make it visible tomorrow morning by 7 in the morning, and it'll be due Friday by 7 in the morning. So you have three full days for that. And then next, we have Chapter 6 Labs, Part 1 and 2. They'll be due on Sunday. And let me get rid of this. I think I was originally going to do this, but I think I'm going to save that for the next week. As far as what we're going to be covering today, wanted to go over the Chapter 6 concepts, how to code methods, because this is an area probably within this course, some of the areas, some of the parts of this course where we get to where some students can struggle. Coding methods, that could be an area where could become a little confusion. And then also when we start talking about object-oriented concepts, that's the other one. That's when things get a little more complex. So, it's important to really understand the concepts of methods, so that you can get the assignments done and do well. So we're going to go ahead and review the Chapter 6 written test and just make sure we understand some of these concepts, so we can do well. And also, I'm going to go through a lab that we had in Chapter 5. It's the home sales form lab. And I'm going to go ahead and show you how you can refactor that. And when I say refactor, I mean you're kind of doing a little bit of recoding, right? You're looking at your code and saying, I could have done this better, or I could have taken this piece. I'm doing something redundantly through this application, through multiple click events, and I can take this piece of code and extract that out and put it in its own method. So we're going to go ahead and do a little refactoring walkthrough, and we'll add some methods for that. And then I'm going to go ahead and walk through the Chapter 6 Labs Part 1. Okay? So let's get started on that. So here, here's the questions and answers, obviously, highlighted answers on the left here. And on the right, this is just kind of some sample code to kind of look, instead of just seeing all the words and nothing else, we can kind of look at some of the code a little bit as well, okay? And this is just an easy way to do this. I do this in Notepad++ instead of, bringing up Visual Studio. It's just a little easier to fit on the screen and easier to understand maybe a little better. So here, the first one, what will the following method return? It's important to understand each piece of the method, right? The first one is your access, and this is private, right? And, what we're going to end up talking about things that are here that are going to answer questions in the next questions as well. But so the first one is access control. You have private, right? It can be private or public. Private means it can only be accessed within that class. The next part of your method is your return type. And so in this case, this is a string. So right here's the answer is a string. Here's the name of your method. Here is your parameters, right? And if you kind of look over here on the right-hand side, a similar, yeah, this one's just using a student ID, but basically here's your method. And, you know, in most cases, just showing in a real world example, usually what you're doing when you're looking something up, a lot of times you're looking something up at like in a database or something, right? You know, we haven't reached that point. You know, we're just usually we put things in arrays or lists and stuff, but you know, basically a lot of times in, you know, real world, you know, you're gonna be using like a student, you know, an ID or something to get it, right? So in the real world, you usually make a call to bring back the name based on a student ID or something, right? And just to call this, let me show you. I'll have to scroll down here. Here, let me just make a state this. So when we in the forms, and we'll go through this again here in a little bit. So when you're, you know, with the window forms, you know, there's all this wiring that takes place. It initializes all those form components, right? So that all those components that you design on your window, right, all in the designer, all of those are accessible within that class, right, within that code that you write. All those different things are accessible, and also you can access different methods as well. It's a little different in like the console apps, and when you like use a main method, right, you have to do it a little different. And so like this class is called program, and to initialize this to be able to access methods in this class, I don't want to get too hung up on this, but to access this, here's your main method. To access these, you have to instantiate the class. You don't have to worry about this too much. We're not going to, you know, be doing much with this week, but I'm just wanting to point out you have to instantiate the class. Then to call a method, you actually have to do it like this: program.getName. Okay. We'll talk. Well, I don't want to confuse things. We'll discuss this later. But basically, this is how when you're, you know, just doing a regular class and not a forms method, you've got to do something like this to access the getName method, right? So whenever you would access this method, it's going to return something, right? We knew that this had a return type of string. So whenever you've got a return type in your method, most likely you're going to be setting that on a variable that you're going to create, right? There's no reason just to do this by itself, right? It's not going to do anything. It's going to get it and it's going to throw it away, because by the time you return from that method, it's gone, right? So here, when you create a variable and assign the value that comes back from this getName method, now you can use that, right? Now you can use what you've called, right? So yeah, we won't talk about that too much. So here's the second one. What keyword do you code at the beginning of your method? If you only want it to be available within the current class, that's private. What keyword do you code for a return type of a method that doesn't return any data? Void, right? So you need to make sure that, you know, you understand, like when you're calling a different method, usually you're in one method calling a different method. If you've got a void method, you're not going to be returning anything, so you can't set anything. So when you've got a void method, it's basically going to do something, and that's it. It's not returning anything. So everything that happens within a void method, it just, you know, that's a good place to like display things, or, you know, write a console log, or do something that you're not, you know, that's not where you want to do a calculation or anything like that. you do a calculation, you're going to want that value back, right? So you wouldn't use void. You would have a different return type. So for each parameter in a parameter list for a method, you must code the data type of the parameter followed by the name of the parameter. So in this case, that was number 4. Yeah. So in this case, you've got a string message, right? You have to state, this is my data type I'm sending. This is my data type I'm sending, and this is the variable. Then you can use this within, this is the parameter, I should say. This is the parameter, and you can use that right in your code, right, within your method. And as you can see, this is void. So when you're calling this, so we'll go ahead and look this one down. I don't want to go back up and down too much here. So here, you're just calling this. As you notice, you don't have a variable here set to this because it's void, right? It's not going to return anything. And like I said, a good reason to use some kind of where you're just performing some task and then it's done and you don't care about it after that. You're not going to be using it anymore from the calling, from the method that you called it from, right? Okay, number 5, when you call a method, the arguments you pass to it must be declared with data types that are compatible with the parameters. Go up here to top. So yeah, basically what it's saying is, so here you've got a quantity and a price. You need to make sure that these data, when you're using it, when you're using these, you got to make sure that they're what you want them to be. You can't use this as a string, right? Obviously, you can convert it to a string before you use it, but you need to make sure that it must be declared with the data types that are compatible with the parameters, right? So these, how you're using this must be compatible with what you defined them as up here, right? I should say int and decimal. Number 6, the signature of a method is formed by and that's the name of the method and its parameter list. So the name of the name of the method is right here, get customer, and here's its parameter list. It's just one, it's an int of ID. Number 7, if you pass a variable by reference, the called method can change the value of the variable in the calling method. So this is a very important concept where, you're always, you're going to be calling methods from a different method, right? So if you call this modify value, and from where you're calling it from, you've got a number, right? And that number has a value. Well, when you pass that in here, when you call this method and you pass it that number, this will modify that number. And so when you return, even though this is void, right? Even when you return, this number will be changed. Okay? And that's only when you use this ref like this, right? If you don't do that, it's like this, right? Then it's not going to change it. Okay? It'll be, this one will increment and it'll change it just within this method body. Once you leave this method, it won't change in this case, right? But in this case, you come in here, you increment that number. When you leave this method and come back, that number is going to be incremented. So if it started out at 20, you come back, it's going to be, if it started at 10 and you came back, it's going to be 20 because you increment by 10 more. So that's called passing a variable by reference, right? And this one here, number 8, is passing the variable by value. And so just like I said, so basically if you pass in the number, you can change it in here, you go back, it's still going to be the original value because you just pass it by value and not reference. these are important things for, for you to realize, because people think that they change the number of something, and then why is my number not changed? Well, you know it doesn't work that way, right? Um, to change a number, if you return this number, if this had a return type of int, right? This had a return type of int, and you returned this number, right? When you return this number, and then from the calling method, you set it to the, then you would have an updated number. So that's a different way, right? And we're going to review that a little more here going forward. So here it's just about an optional parameter. If you declare a parameter for a method as optional, the parameter must be assigned a default value. So here's a default value that you give this. So basically, if you pass in a value. If it has a value, then it's going to use that. Otherwise, it's going to use guessed. Number 10 here, which of the following code snippets passes an argument by name? Yeah, so this is just showing this is how you pass an argument by name using subtotal, colon, subtotal. Well, basically it's the value, right? The name and then the value, right? Number 11. I think some of these got skipped for some reason. But which of the following is not an advantage of passing arguments by name? You don't have to know the name of the associated parameter. Okay. To generate an event handler. For a control event, you can display the events list for the control and then double click on the event. We've done that before, obviously. Once you display the list of events for a control, you can wire an existing event handler to any event by selecting the event handler from the drop-down list for the event. I'm not really worried about, this is important for you to know, but kind of really wanted to focus more on the methods, but, it is important to also be able to do that, right? To generate a method call and a method from an existing code, you can use a feature called what? Refactoring. So a method from an existing code you can call. Okay. Refactoring is more than, yeah. 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 I don't disagree with this. Refactoring is a little more than just this. I think from the concept, from, more from an industry perspective, you're gonna write some code, and as time goes on, you come back to the code. You may have to update that code because some requirements change for the application you're working on, and you say, you don't always have all the information you need, and things change as time goes by, and then you come back to your code and say, I really should have done this a little differently. It would have been a little cleaner, or to be a little more efficient, and you change your code. That's kind of called refactoring, right? Number 5. This is 15. When coding expression bodied, whenever you think of expression, think of a lambda operator, and that's with the equal sign and the greater than sign, right? Like this. So it's worthwhile within your code to try to use different ones when you can, just so you can learn to use it. This could be a lot more efficient. Write a lot less code instead of having to do multiple lines of code, right? Number 16 here, to define a tuple as a return type for a method, you can define its members by separating them with commas and then closing them in parentheses, right? So here you're doing that like that. To delete an event handler, you not only have to delete its method, but it's also its event wiring. And I know that's when you got to be careful, especially when you're, changing the events in the properties window, and that's because if you've got things set in your properties window to trigger an event, and then you go to the code and delete that method, you're going to have problems. That's why it's always best to delete the thing from the properties window before you actually delete the method itself. If you haven't run into that problem already, you will eventually if you're not careful. It happened. It's happened to me. I delete something. I say, oh, gotta go. I gotta get rid of all the wiring first. Um, Number 18. If you have an int variable named years and two decimal variables named principal, prin, and rate, which statement can you use to call the method with the following method declarations? And in this case, it's going to be the get interest rate, years, rate, principal. Just kind of basic here. Years, rate, principal. So let's see. Years, rate, principal. Yeah, this is from calling it, right? Calling it. You don't you don't define, like here you're defining this, right? Well, this is the method. This one is how you call it, and this is just showing you in the right order, right? The first one's years, second one's rate, third one's principal. Sorry, I kind of was a little confused by that myself. But yeah, just the first one's years, second one's rate, third one's principal. If the following get interest method uses a decimal variable named interest to store the interest amount, which statement can you use to return the interest amount? So return interest, right? You never want to do this. It can't be uppercase, has to be lowercase. And you don't define the variable type or anything like that when you do a return. You just return the value of the variable. This is number 20. Which of the following statements would you use to call a private method name initialized variable that accepts no parameters and doesn't return a value? Following statements would use to call a private method called initialized variables that accepts no parameters and returns no value. That's right. Yep. This is calling. All right. When it says calling, this is how you call it. All right. This would be how, well, you would never put void in here like that. But, when you define it, that's where you have your access control, like say private, your data type, what you're returning, right? But that's when you define your method. When you're just calling a method, you just call it like that. No parameters. Which of the following statements would you use to pass a variable named message by reference to a method named display message? Always remember you have to have your ref before the name of your variable. Which statement calls a method in the current form named setButtons and passes it a false value? So you're just doing this, setButtons, dot false. Okay. Let's see, 23 here. Which of the following declares a method named getMessage that returns a string value and requires one decimal parameter named current balance and is only available within the current form? So obviously, if you return values, it's got to be a string. getMessage, right? Requires one parameter called decimal, and so C would be the right answer there. '24. Which of the following declares a private method named getMessage that returns a string value and requires a string parameter named full name and a decimal parameter named current balance. So there's only two that have both two parameters, and that's D, this one, and that one. This is incorrect way to do this, right? You don't put this colon, you don't do it like that. So this is the only correct answer. Which of the following is a shorter way to code the following get total method? And that's, basically you're using the expression, which is the lambda expression. (26). Which of the following declares a method named getTotals that returns a tuple and has two members named total quantity and total amount? So here's your private this is how you define it, right? It's a little different. Let's see, 27. Which of the following statements would be used to wire a click event of a button named button clear to an event handler named clear controls? This is how you do it. This would be one way to do it in the code itself without using the properties, right? I wouldn't worry too much about that at this point. So, the important things, to really remember here, and we're going to kind of review a few of these things as we're like refactoring some code. Just make sure that, that a void doesn't return a value. So whenever you call a method, you need to make sure that you understand no values coming back from that. When you need to make sure that when you've got a method that returns a certain type, right? If it returns a decimal, you need to make sure the variable that you create would be a decimal. One other way, and we're going to look at this here in a few minutes, another way that you could potentially, even if you got a void method, if you have your variables defined at the class level, right, you can update those variables within your void method. It will update them at that class level, right? Also, we also talked about using the ref keyword that could update a variable, right? But otherwise, the only way, within a void method, there really isn't any other way to hold on to those, change any variables that you send in, right? If you're expecting something back, you do it a different way, right? You create a data type for that. So let's go ahead and let's go ahead and look at that refactoring example. So here's a finished, solution for the, Chapter 5 labs. And in here, you notice, we've got a basically, your class form 1. Here's this public method. You want to make sure, obviously you never want to mess with this one. We're going to start playing with these methods, creating methods and stuff. We were always used to kind of putting everything within the button click events. And, we didn't have to mess with something sometimes, plus we used some variables at the class level, but that was about it, right? Well, we're going to be creating some more methods now. One thing you want to make sure is within your window forms, you don't mess with this. You really want to leave this alone, right? So One way to look at this though, and it even tells you on here, if you hover over that, it says required method for designer support. Do not modify the contents of this method with the code editor. Okay. Not that you can't, but it can be a little dangerous sometimes. And so you really shouldn't do it unless you really don't have any choice at all. One thing you can do is you can right click on this and go to definition, right? And I'm sure you've seen this before. If you depends on how you click things, it'll bring this up. But basically, it's going to not initialize all these variables. So these are all these different variables that you've created that are accessible within this class. That's why, we don't, they're not defined in the top of our class, right? To access our labels and our buttons. It's because it's initialized so you have access to these things within your class, like we've been doing, right? So, leave this alone. I wouldn't mess with this. But did want to point out, and we've already been doing this, these are our class level variables, right? So these are accessible in our class, right? So like I was saying, like here you've got Daniel total. So since it's not defined here, right? You're just adding to it. This is defined up here. So this is where you can do a void, because the button clicks do the void. They're void methods. They don't return anything. You can access, you can update data because you've got it defined up here in your class level, right? Obviously, you can access different, let's see, your labels, because we've seen how they're initialized, right? All those ones that are initialized are just available for you to access, right? Just wanted to point that out. And, so when, it's going to be pretty much the same thing when you create your own methods as well, okay? You're only going to be able, especially when you have a void method, everything in the, if you didn't have any parameters sent to this, you're not going to be able to access things, right? But here, let's go ahead and do a little bit of refactoring here. So first thing, let's go ahead and grab this. So this is very redundant, okay? And let's just do a cut here, okay? And up here, we're going to create a new method, all right? And we're going to do a private. We're going to do void here. And we're going to do display totals. All right. And then and we'll hit save. So here in this void method, we have access to this because they're all initialized. Like I showed you, they're all initialized within the form. And these we already defined up here. Okay. So these are also accessible within this method. So we didn't have to pass anything here. These are all accessible. Okay, all these different variables. So we really don't have to do anything here more than that. So basically, we can go ahead and here, let's just copy that. Where did I get rid of it? Right here. So here we're just going to go ahead and call this like that. And let's go ahead and run this. And this is, which one was this? This is Danielle's button. So let's go ahead and start this. How much was the sale? Click Daniel. And then you can see this was all the totals that were displayed. So instead of having that in that method, hard-coded in that method, right? We moved it out of that, and that's called refactoring. We refactored that into this display totals, right? Now, if we go down here, that was a Danielle button. We go down here to Edwards. Let's do the same thing with this. All right. And then we can go down here to Francis as well and do this. So instead of having that in 3 places, we can just call the method. We're doing a little refactoring. We're cutting down on the code. We're not cutting and pasting it all over the place, right? We don't have redundant code. Let's save that. Make sure that runs. Let's do each one. Yeah, and that's just how this is some students that from previous, and you might have developed yours, you might have created yours a little differently, but so this is how he did it. So that was it shows the sales and all the totals each time and who has the most. In this case, this Edward has the most sales, and then we'll just make sure that this other one works because each one of these was executed based on the button pushed. So yep. So our display totals worked. Now let's see what else we can do. Here's something. We have all of this, all this logic, all this if in each one of these, right? So let's grab that. And then this is, so what do we want to do here? Let's cut that. And then let's go up here. And I'm going to do a private determine winner. Right? And we want this to be void for now, just because we think that maybe we're going to get away with this. And let's see what happens. We're not, right? So what we're going to have to do here, right? So let's go look at Daniel, Edward, Francis. I know we already cut it out of there. Let's go here. So what was Daniel? Daniel's a double, right? So what we're going to have to do here, all of these are these max. So we're going to have to do, we're going to have to pass variables here, right? Parameters. So we're going to do this, right? And then we're going to do, just make sure that one. Okay. So now it looks good. The editor, the IDE is not complaining about anything. So let's go ahead and it'll actually let you. Okay, so where did we grab that from? Let's see. We did that before our display totals, right? So right here. So here, right, we're going to send, we'll just do this by hand, right? So we're going to do that. There you go. So we refactored display totals and we've refactored determine winner. Let's save that. Let's make sure that I'm sure it's going to work, but so let's put that here for each one of these. So we cut down our code a lot, right? We cut down our code a lot. Let's get rid of that. Start that back up again. See if everything works. Okay, that looks good. Daniel has, well, this is for winner. Daniel has the most sales. And then, okay, let's give Francis more. Francis, so looks good, right? So I did a little refactoring, created new methods. And this first one here, when display total, just to kind of review, we always have access the way the forms works, initialize components. This is going to initialize all those form components, and so you'll have access to all of those within your methods, right? Now this was programmer created. These were created by the programmer here, right? So these were defined at the class level, so you have access to these. So you didn't have to pass anything in here, right, for access to those. Now here was a different situation where we've got the max for these different ones, and it was done within the individual button click methods. So we don't have these defined at the class level. They're only defined within that button click method, so we had to pass them in here, right? And once again, we're returning void. We're not returning anything. We're just setting a variable called winner, which winner was defined also up here, right? Let's see what else. Now, certain things you cannot, we could refactor this as well. I just don't want to get things too complicated for you. But we could pass that in, right? So what are we getting with these? We're using these as totals. Yeah. Well, we could do this. We could refactor this a little more. I don't want to get into anything that, too complex. We could obviously refactor this more. We could refactor this a lot more. Really just wanted to, show you that, you can go ahead and remove some of your redundant code that you have and put them in methods. You just have to realize that what you have access and what you don't have access to, all right? And if you have to send in parameters or not send in parameters. Okay. Any questions about that? I think it's pretty straightforward. What we did was pretty straightforward. Just an idea of how you can refactor code, get rid of some of your redundant code, understand a little bit more about methods and how to use the methods. So let's go ahead and let's just go ahead and take about a 10-minute break, if that's all right. Let's go. Just come on back at 9 o'clock, and let's go back, and then we're going to go ahead and go through labs, part 1 labs. We'll go through all of those. See if I can give some tips to help you through for coding those. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and look at the Chapter 6 labs, part 1. So here, you're going to have an array of fortune cookies. Make this a little bit bigger for now. You're going to have an array of the following fortune cookie sayings and randomly selected 2 different phrases. So here's the ones you're going to have to code this in your method, or create a string array either at the class level or the method level. And then create a new method called generate fortune. Basically no parameters, returns void. And it's going to output 2 random strings from the array. So if we look at, I'm going to look at an example here. This is going to be, one of obviously the most basic ones you're going to be doing. But here's just kind of an example. I didn't want to do exactly the the ones here. So I just came up with a string, a colors array, all these different colors, right? Now you can, since you're just using this to generate the color, you're not doing much here. This array, you can define this at the class level, or you can just define it at the method level. I would say if as long as you're just doing something, you don't need access. You don't need to provide any other methods access to something. I would think from from a best practices standpoint, you should just define that within that method itself if it's not needed outside that method, right? So you can go ahead and, like in this case, I've got colors. I defined the colors here, and then, but like I'm saying here, actually probably should just do it in here. And what you're going to want to do, we've already used random before, right? We did this when we did the rock, paper, scissors. We just did that from the computer though, right? The user of the app would click a button and that would determine their choice. And then we did a random for the computer, right? But in this case, we need to do two random strings. So here's the first one, right, for colors, and you just have to do this again and call the second one num2, and that way you'll have two, right? And then you'll have to set the label values for the array at num1 and num2 positions in the array. Pretty basic here. Not much to this, but just wanted to give you a little head start to get this done. The next one is, let's see. So here, we've already kind of done this one, right? This is the college admissions one. Now, I suggest that, it depends, kind of, you could do this at your own risk. If you want to try to copy it over from your previous labs and copy it over, that's fine. But, and I just don't want to say just go ahead and copy it over. Because, I don't want students to run into some problems because, some of the students define things differently and how they're doing their solutions and stuff. And I just don't want to tell you. I would say, just to be on the safe side, I would just recreate the GUI again. It's not going to take you long to recreate this, just a few minutes, right? Recreate this GUI again, then you can go ahead and go to your button click event of the old one, copy that code, and put that into the button event, and then go ahead and go from there. As opposed to if you try to copy that whole directory from one to the other labs, I'm just concerned that you might mess something up, and it's just going to be, it's going to cost you more time getting things fixed by doing that than if you would have just created it yourself. It's a redo a little bit, but there's not much here, right? That's up to you. Just wanted to point that out. So basically, this is pretty much the same thing as the other lab, except you're just going to create a method called isStudentAccepted, right? And you always have to read through this to know if you need parameters or if you need to have a return type. So in this case, this accepts a GPA and an admission test score as parameters. So that basically means that within your button click event, you will have your GPA and your admission test score. You'll be getting that from your text fields, okay? And your button click event, you will be getting the values, right? In your button click event and your button click method. You're going to pass those as variables right here. So these are going to be parameters, right? For GPA and admission test score. And you're going to have a return type here of a Boolean being either a true, so it's going to either be true or false, right? So here's an example of the method. You got your bool for Boolean, right? Is student accepted. Here's your, it depends on how you define some things. Some people might have used for GPA float, some might have used a double, whatever. But in this case, the GPA being passed in as a float, and the other one's a test score is an integer, okay? And then when you defined it in your button.click event, in your button.click method, right? This is what you're going to be wanting to do. This is your time is accepted, so this is either be true or false. It's going to come back here, right? So you're going to be having all your logic, right? You're going to have all your logic that you had in your button click event in this method now to determine if the student is accepted, and then you're going to return just determine if it's a true or false, if it is accepted or not, and then you're going to return true or false, and then this is how you define this within your button click method, right? And then you just display it as accepted, right? Like I said, you can go ahead and try to copy it from the old one into the new, but it won't take you long just to create the GUI, and that way you'll have everything together. And I'm just concerned that some students might have some problems and get their configuration messed up and end up spending a lot of time just getting that fixed, that they could have just quickly created the GUI. Okay, so let's see. For this one, I don't think I didn't write any tips for this one here, but this is just counting the vowels. So basically, you're going to create a method called count vowels that accepts a phrase as a parameter. So you're sending in the phrase that you get from the text field from the button click event, right, into this count vowels method, and returns a number of vowels in the phrase. And then your button click events just setting the label with the amount of vowels, right? Pretty basic. You just have to read these carefully, as it tells you. Accepts a phrase as phrase as a parameter. So that means there's going to be a parameter in here, right? It's not going to be open and closed parentheses. If it says parameter, you need to make sure that you're passing a parameter in here. If it says it returns a number of vowels, right? So that means you have the return type. An int would be fine for this. Number of vowels, an integer, right? It's going to be a whole number. So your return type would be an integer. Let's go ahead and look at lab 4 here. So this is just a painting estimate, length and width. So here you want to create your method, calculate total area, right? I actually gave you an example of it here. So where you're going to return a double. Your data type is going to be a double, and you're going to be passing in your length as a double and your width as a double. As far as your height, right? Your height, you can just define this within this method. You don't have to define this height as. You don't have to define the height at the class level. You can define it right here in the method, because it's basically throwaway. And what I mean by throwaway is once you use it within this method, you don't need access to it. You've already done your calculation. You just need to return your total area. You don't care about the height anymore, right? And I didn't write one for calculate the paint estimate. So here you're going to have a second method, right? Which is going to be the output of this one. The output of the calculate total area is going to be the input to the calculate paint estimate, right? So this is going to accept the total area. So you pass that as a parameter and returns the total cost of the job, right? So basically you're going to be using this $6 per square foot. And this is another one. Really no reason, no reason to define this at the class level. Nobody else needs access. And like I said, it's usually best practices if if it's not something you need to share between multiple methods, and it's just something that you can define within the method itself. You should define it in the method. And like I'm saying, it's throwaway because once you did your calculation, returned it, you don't care about that variable anymore, right? Okay, the next one here is lab 5. Okay, and I didn't put any tips on this one here. The only thing and obviously we've already done this, right? We just did this this past week. So this was that card mask. Now, like I said, you want to try to copy it over, that's fine. Or you can just redo this GUI real quick and copy your code into your button event and then go from there and kind of do the refactoring, kind of what we did on the refactoring. So you can copy your code from the one that you did last week over into the new button event, the new one, and then you start out with all your code in that your on click method, and then you can go ahead and refactor it to add your mask number, right? Just kind of like we refactored the home sales, right? Just the one thing that I think is a little different here: replace the number with a letter, there might have been a few people because I have looked at some of the labs from last week, and there's some people who did do letters as well, but I don't believe that one asked you to mask the letters, but this one is asking you to mask the letters. So basically, if it's a letter or a number, you need to use the pound sign or the hash sign, right? The hash code. If it's a letter or a number. And I think for the last one, it didn't say letter, but this one's telling you if it's a letter, also do the same thing. So you need to add that if you didn't. And then you need to make sure that number spaces and dashes. So you want to, if there's a space, you want to do it just kind of like down here. In this example, you leave the spaces and you leave a dash. If there's a dash should show. If there's a space should show. Otherwise, it should be a hash, right? A pound sign. Let's see this one here. So this one is a little more complicated in that you've got multiple parameters, right? So you can decide which of these that make sense just to be defined within the methods, and if there's ones that should be defined at the class level, right? It all depends on how you do things and what makes sense, right? So here, so you got these different get wood. So this accepts no parameters, right? So that basically means this, right? Private void. Does it say void? No, it returns a type of wood. So it's going to return a type of wood as a string, right? So you're going to do it like that, right? Get wood accepts no parameters. So you're not adding any parameters. You're just doing an open and close here. There's a type of wood as a string. Get wood accepts no parameters. So in here, what you're going to need to do is in get wood, you're going to need to grab your, let's look at this thing. So here's your text field for type of wood. So within get wood, you're going to need to grab you have to grab this field, this text field, right? You need to grab the value of this text field. And if it's an M, it's going to be mahogany. If it's an O, it's oak. If it's a P, it's pine. Otherwise, anything else is going to be other, right? So in this case, since this has no parameters, you're not passing in the that you're not getting it in your click event, then passing it to here. You're going to actually just get your value of your text field right in your get wood. All right. Get drawers accepts no parameters and returns the number of drawers as an int. Right. So here you're doing private int, right? Number of drawers as an int, accepts no parameters, so staying just like that, right? So that's that's an easy one. So basically you're going to get your text field here within get drawers. You're going to actually get the value out of your text field and just pass it. And so your button is going to have a variable number of drawers, right? And that's what you're going to set this to. Well, accepts no parameters. Yep. And returns a number, right? Yep. So you're going to have to make sure for both get wood and get drawers within your button that you have a variable that you're setting based on calling these methods, right? Calculate wood cost, accepts the type of wood, right? So here you're doing a string, right? Something like that, right? Wood type. And returns the cost of a wood as a double, right? So here you're doing private double. Like that. You'll have to calculate the wood cost. Then here's calculate the drawer cost, accepts the number of drawers as an int, and returns the cost of the drawers as a double. So and then here, what are you doing here on this one? An int, right? Calculate total cost, accepts the type of a wood. So string wood type here, right? As a string, and number of drawers, right? And returns the total cost of the desk as a double. Okay. Here. All right. So here, this is the one, probably the most complicated one, obviously. So basically, it's a bank app where you log in, and based on the account number and PIN, so the account number needs to match what you have defined, and also the associated PIN number that's associated with that account. So these have to match for you to successfully log in. You click to log in, and it tells you welcome. Your account gives you your account balance, right? And then you can go ahead and make deposits and withdrawals. So this is going to update that account balance depending on if it's a deposit or a withdrawal. Okay. So let me pull up another. Let me pull up an example of this so we can look at this. Okay, yeah, I'm not going to show you all the code, but I do want to show you the functionality of this thing real quick here. So basically, you're going to be entering a account number, and this is whatever account numbers, however you're the one that's going to decide the account numbers and the pins, right? And you're just going to use either parallel arrays, or you can use using like the list collection, right? So here we're going to enter, this is one of the account numbers. That's the first account number. And then the pins, this is the pin that's associated with this. And as you see, you don't see anything else down here right now. You just have a log in, log out. I guess you could even have the log out hidden if you want it, but that's okay. So once you click log in, then these other ones show, right? So basically what you're can do here, make it look nice, is when you create your form, you can set the visibility of those, right? So it's false, right? So it's not visible. So all the labels and these text boxes and these new buttons, the visibility will be false on those until you have a successful login. Then you can go ahead and do a deposit. So basically for this application, you're going to have four different arrays or list. You're going to have one for account numbers. You're going to have one for PIN numbers. You're going to have one for names that's associated. So each of these, right, are going to line up. So account, PIN, name's John Smith, and then also an account balance. So right now we have an account balance of $10,000. So we're going to make a deposit here. Or if we make a deposit of $2,000, click it. As you can see, this updated the account balance. If we make a withdrawal of 1,000, now it should be 11,000. Make another withdrawal, that's down to 10,000 again. Okay. And then also we have this log out like this. Resets all the variables, changes the other ones back to your visibility, back to true, right? You change your visibility back to true for all of these, so they're all invisible. Okay. So let's look at a few things on this. Okay. So like I said, you're going to have your four different, what I did here, kind of like a little example I did, I don't know if I did anything. You're going to have four different lists. No, I did. So define this, you're going to be using different methods. So this, you're going to have to probably define it obviously you can define it in one method and be passing around, but maybe best just go and define this at the class level, right? You got your count numbers, right? Which is your first text field. PIN numbers, your second. Third one's your balance numbers, which is your account balance that's in the label. The one you're going to change the value of, right? And then names is the names on the account. In this case, it's Mr. Smith, right? And then for your login, what you kind of do here is get your account nums, get the length of that. So it's a little different to get the number for in a list. You use dot counts. So this will give you the length of this array of this list, right? Of account numbers, and here's your length, right? And then you're going to go ahead and loop through that, right? And then you're going to say if the account nums equals the user account and the pin nums equals the user pin, right? You're looping through those, right? So this is what's in the text field. This is what's in the text field. If you find those, they match, then you're going to set your deposit withdrawal label and your text fields and your button fields to visible. Visible equals true, right? And this is how you would do that. So if you had your deposit text field called deposit text, right? You can call it whatever. You do dot visible equals true, and then it will make it visible. Return what the int I is, so you know the location in the array. Okay, because here you're gonna need to display things based on that location, right? If it's the first one in the list, right? If it's the first one in each of these, you're going to need to know that going forward. So you're going to have to return what location it's at. If it's at 0, 1, 2, 3, whatever locations it's at, right? I wanted to give you some, but I don't want to give you too much. And then, a good thing to use, kind of best practices sometimes also is like if something doesn't match, return like a -1. That way it doesn't confuse you. It's just a good one to use. If something doesn't match, it's a -1 as opposed to a 0 or a 1 because, I don't know, it can be more confusing. But by using -1, it's just kind of good best practices. So it does not match, just return the -1. And then you're going to show, so let's do, I'll go ahead and show you one where we do something incorrect. And it's going to basically check to see, hey, what's with my value? My value is -1, then I know to display a message, right? We'll look at that again here after we finish. But here's your login method. I didn't put what types, I didn't put the access or the return type or parameters. You need to figure out that on your own. And so for a logout, when you click the logout, you want to reset your text fields back to empty string. So set everything that you were entering, all of that to empty strings, and then set your deposit, your withdrawal label, all that stuff, the visibility to equal false, so that's not viewable anymore. All right. And then in the make deposits, you're going to get your deposit from the text field and convert it to a decimal. And then add to your balance number, right? So in this case, it's just a J. You can use what you want. In this case, it's just showing it's a J. But whatever you passed in, this is your location, right, within your list. The first one could be 10,000, second one 30,000, right? That all, coincides with these other ones, right? Just the parallel list, right? And the withdrawals, basically the same thing. But here you're going to do, for deposit, you're adding. For withdrawal, you're subtracting, right? So let me go ahead and pull up that app again. So here, like saying if you put something in here and it doesn't match and you try to log in, incorrect login, check info and try again, right? So this is when, like I said, you return a -1 and then you can check it and say, oh, well, if it's a -1, then go ahead and use this message, right? So let's just, for the heck of it, we'll just take a look at another one just so you can see this work again. And then the pin's going to be 2 on this. And like I said, this is whatever date, whatever account numbers and PIN numbers you come up with. I don't think it says that in here, does it? I'm almost sure it doesn't. Yep. Yep. Okay. So put a valid one in, hit login. Now all of a sudden you change the visibility to display, visible equals true. You've got your welcome name, your account balance, and everything else here, right? Deposit, withdrawal. And then your log out. Okay. Probably the most complicated thing we've done, I guess, especially using methods now to encapsulate your code, right? So that kind of covers all the labs from part one. Tomorrow we'll do part two. I did notice earlier when we took our break that I did not make the assignments visible, the labs one and two visible within inside Rankin. So I'll go ahead and do that right when I get off. I get off here, and then tomorrow your hands-on test will be viewable at 7 o'clock in the morning. You'll have 3 days to do that. So then that's all I have for today, and like I said, tomorrow we'll go ahead and do we'll review the hands-on test, and we'll review the labs part two. So anybody have any questions about anything? Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and let you go, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Please let me know if you have any questions. Just go ahead and email me and let me know, or hit me up on Discord. Have a good one.